Hi, this is Jack from Maths Forge, and in today's lesson we're going to be solving quadratic equations by completing the square. So before doing this lesson, you should have done the lesson on completing the square. And if you need a recap of that, you can check out the video on completing the square by searching for it on our YouTube channel, or you can go to your dashboard and under the practice menu, search for completing the square. So let's start with our 1-star example. Here we're being asked to solve x squared plus 8x plus 4, which is equal to 0. Write the answer in surd form. So how can we go about doing this? Well, to complete the square for a quadratic, we write a single bracket and then a square on the outside of this bracket. Where there's an x squared in the equation, we're just going to write a single x within the bracket here. And the next part that goes into the bracket comes from this plus 8x. We actually just use the plus 8 and not the x, and we take half of this value and put it into this bracket here. So it's going to be plus 4. The next step is to subtract, and I cannot emphasize this enough. You are always and only going to subtract in this next step here. This number here squared. So whether it's a plus 4 or a minus 4, you're always going to subtract it for this next part. But in our case, it's a plus 4, so we're going to subtract this number here squared. We are then going to bring down our plus 4 at the end of the equation and write it next to it here. And this is equal to 0. The next step is to simplify everything outside of the bracket. So we're going to have minus 4 squared. 4 squared is 16, so we're going to have minus 16 plus 4, which is equal to 0. And the minus 16 and the plus 4 simplify further. This is going to give us x plus 4 squared. Minus 16 plus 4 gives us minus 12, and this is equal to 0. Now at this stage, to solve the equation, we're going to get rid of this minus 12 first. And we're going to do this by adding 12 to both sides of the equation. This is going to leave us with x plus 4 squared on the left-hand side, and on the right-hand side, it's going to leave us with 12. The next step to solve this equation is to get rid of this square operation here. And the opposite of squaring is, of course, square rooting. So I'm going to square root both sides of the equation. This is going to cancel out the square here, leaving us just with x plus 4. And on the right-hand side, it's going to give us plus or minus the square root of 12. Now, there's a definition in algebra, and you can even consider it to be a law in algebra. Whenever you square root a variable that's being squared, it always outputs an answer that has a positive and a negative value in front of it. This is something you should remember. So after writing the plus and the minus, all we have to do now is subtract 4 from both sides to get x on its own. So I'm going to do that here. Minus 4 from both sides. And this is going to leave us with x is equal to minus 4 plus or minus the square root of 12. I prefer to write the square root part of the surd after the plus and the minus, and the integer in front of the plus and the minus. And this should be our final answer. It's in surd form, so let's check our answer. There it is. Now let's do a 2-star example. Here we're being asked to solve 2x squared plus 8x minus 6 is equal to 0. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to divide the entire equation by 2. And we can do this because every term within this equation can be divided by 2. So the 2x squared divided by 2 is going to leave us with x squared. The plus 8x divided by 2 is going to leave us with 4x. And the minus 6 divided by 2 is going to leave us with minus 3. And then we're going to have 0 divided by 2, which is going to leave us with 0. Now we can complete the square on this expression here. It's going to be a single bracket with a square on the outside. Instead of an x squared, we're going to have an x. And instead of a plus 4x, we're going to have half of plus 4, which is plus 2. We are now going to subtract this number here squared. And we're going to bring down our minus 3. And this is equal to 0. We now simplify this part of the equation. So we have 2 squared, which is 4. So minus 4 minus 3 simplifies to minus 7. And then we have x plus 2 squared. We now add 7 to both sides of this equation. This leaves us with x plus 2 squared on the left-hand side. And on the right-hand side, it leaves us with 7. Now we get rid of the square operation by square rooting both sides of this equation. This is going to leave us with x plus 2 on the left-hand side. And on the right-hand side, remember, when you're square rooting a variable or an expression being squared, the output ends up taking a plus and a minus in front of it. Our next step now is to get rid of this plus 2. So I'm going to subtract 2 from both sides. This is now going to leave us with x is equal to negative 2 plus or minus the square root of 7. And if we check our answer, there it is. We'll now do a 3-star example. For the 3-star examples, we can't actually divide the entire equation by anything, because even though x squared has a 4 in front of it, and 12 can be divided by 4, we cannot divide this 11 by 4. So we're going to have to complete the square in a different way now. The first step you're going to want to do here is you're going to want to factorize a 4 out of your first 2 terms. So we're going to have 4, and then we're going to have x squared plus 3x, and then close brackets, and then we're going to have a minus 11, which is equal to 0. That's the first thing that you're going to want to do. The second step that you're going to want to do is to complete the square on this part of the expression here. So how we do this is as follows. I'm going to keep my 4 on the outside, and since I'm going to need another set of brackets, I'm going to write down square brackets to distinguish them from the curved brackets, and it's going to give us the following: x plus 3 over 2 squared. And then as you can see, we've actually completed the square for this x squared plus 3x. It goes into a bracket with a square on the outside instead of an x squared that's an x, and half of this number here, 3. Half of 3 I'm just going to write as 3 over 2. I'm then going to subtract this number here on the inside, squared, so it's going to be 3 over 2 squared. And then normally I bring down my minus 11, but since my minus 11 hasn't been included in this factorizing, it can stay where it is. So now I finish this off by closing the square bracket, and then we have the minus 11, which is equal to 0. I'm now going to go ahead and multiply my 4 into both parts of this expression. This is going to leave us with 4x plus 3 over 2 squared minus 4, 3 over 2 squared, minus 11, which is equal to 0. And now to simplify this further, we're going to have 4x plus 3 over 2 squared minus 4, and the square here for the fraction applies to the numerator and the denominator, so it's going to leave us with 9 over 4. And then we have minus 11, which is equal to 0. And this is going to simplify further to give us the following: x plus 3 over 2 squared. The 4 multiplied by the 9 over 4. Well, since the 9 is dividing by a 4 and it's going to get multiplied by a 4, the 4's cancel each other out. But you can also multiply the 4 to the 9, giving you 36. And then that ends up dividing by a 4, leaving us with 9. And then we have minus 11, which is equal to 0. The minus 9 and the minus 11 simplify to give us minus 20, which is equal to 0. And then we still have the 4x plus 3 over 2 squared minus 20, which is equal to 0. At this stage, we're going to want to rearrange for x. So we're going to add 20 to both sides of this equation. This is going to leave us with 4x plus 3 over 2 squared, which is equal to 20. The next step is to divide both sides of this equation by this 4. Since 4 is multiplying onto this entire bracket that's being squared, we're going to divide by 4 to get rid of it. So we're going to divide by 4, divide by 4. This now leaves us with x plus 3 over 2 squared, which is equal to 20 divided by 4, which is 5. I'm going to carry on my working out up here. So now we have x plus 3 over 2 squared, which is equal to 5. I'm going to square root both sides of this equation now, and this should leave us with the following: x plus 3 over 2, which is equal to plus or minus the square root of 5. And now for our final step, to get x on its own, we're going to subtract 3 over 2 from both sides, and that's going to look like this. This now gives us x, which is equal to minus 3 over 2, plus or minus the square root of 5. And if you want to, you can simplify your minus 3 over 2 to give you minus 1.5 or minus 1.5. It really is up to you, as long as your answer is equivalent. And if we check our answer, there it is. X is equal to minus 1.5, which is equivalent to minus 3 over 2, plus or minus the square root of 5. And that's it for the lesson on solving quadratic equations by completing the square.